I'm going to go over the Battle for the Underdark rulebook. I am again going to skip the basic game rules because the Rise of the Valkyrie basic game video that I made I believe is enough for Heroscape, but I'll address any basic rules that switch to Master when it comes up. Otherwise, this is going to be another Master Rules video. I will make a separate video with what the Dungeons & Dragons expansion specifically added, just to make it so you're not watching another hour-long video to find out about treasure glyphs and such. Compared to the basic game, what is the master game for Heroscape? Well, in the basic game, all of your units will have just one hit point, and all of their basic stats are going to be here. In the master game, they'll have abilities, more stats, and just different traits, hit zones and stuff, which we'll get into when we break down army cards. But in the master game is where your figures get serious. With special powers and special rules for moving and battling, because of their extra strength and powers, these warriors can't be defeated so easily. As a Valkyrie General, for example we'll say Valkyrie, your mission is to gather a well-balanced army, lead them boldly into battle, and wage war strategically to conquer the enemy. Good luck, and may the best Valkyrie General win. So, the object of Heroscape is pretty simple. It's create a battlefield, choose your army, then fight the battle of all time. To win, achieve the victory condition. Getting ready to play is the first thing you do. You set up your battlefield, number 1. To do this, choose a battlefield in a master game scenario from the Battlefields and Game Scenarios section that is in association with the rulebook that you're currently building from, or after you've played several games, you may just want to create your own battlefields and game scenarios with victory conditions. We are going to be using the Drow Ambush map from the Battle for the Underdark manual, and it has certain rules and things to set up. And when you're playing with more than 2 players, you can play the scenarios in master sets with 3 or more players, including teams. And when playing with multiple master sets and expansion sets, there's a few special rules for doing this, which we'll go over after we go over the master rulebook. But first off is about army cards. In this game, you'll use the master side of the army card, which is right here. But as in the basic game, each army card features either a hero or a squad with move, range, attack, and defense numbers. You'll notice that the master side of each card has much more information about the figure or figures on it. As you play, you'll become more familiar with how all this information figures into gameplay. Let's break down an army card and get into the anatomy of how it's structured. Alright, we'll start on the left-hand side of the card, which up at the top is the species. This is the biological classification of the figure or figures on the army card. Below that, we have whether it is a unique, uncommon, or common, and whether it's a hero or a squad. So unique army cards have a special rule that when selecting cards to put in your army, you cannot select 2 of the same unique army card. Common army cards and uncommon army cards have a different rule. When selecting cards to put in your army, you can include 2 or more of the same common or uncommon army card. Here's an example of an uncommon, and here's an example of a common. Going back over here, we have below, whether it's unique, uncommon, or common, the class, that is the type of figure that it is. For this character here is a cleric. And then below the class, we have their personality, their dominant characteristic, which merciful in this case. And then below that, we have the size and height according to the game map, which is the size of the hero or squad and the number of levels high they are in the game. Moving on over to the right-hand side of the card, you'll notice this area here. This little green dot by her face is the target point. That is where line of sight is drawn from on the character. The red area is the hit zone, that when targeted, this is what is considered able to be attacked. Gray denotes an area of the figure that is not part of a target. Alright, moving down here, we have the top stat, which is life. That is how many wounds this character receives before being destroyed. We have the move, which is how many hexes this character may move, up or down, etc. We have the range, which is how many spaces away the character can see. And then we have attack, which is how many combat dice it rolls when making attacks. And then we have defense, which is how many combat dice it rolls when rolling for defense. Below this, we have the point value of the army card, which is for drafting and scoring and other things that involve needing points. And then in this area of the card, this is where the special powers are going to be located. Most figures have special powers that allow them to, quote-unquote, break the rules when moving, attacking, and defending. And I forgot this in the other videos, but up here is where you can see the name of the character as well as which Valkyrie General that character serves. Step number 2 for getting ready to play is gathering and placing your army. For the master game scenarios, you can use a pre-made army or a preset army, or you can draft an army. These are the ways of gathering an army, as explained in a little bit. As you gather your army, make sure that the total point value doesn't exceed the one listed in your chosen game scenario or the point value set by the players beforehand. It can be lower, but not higher. Players don't need to have the same number of army cards. For example, you might have 3 army cards while your opponent might have 4 or 5. And then, army cards come in various colors. In the master game, the loyalties of good and evil warriors may become neutral or even shift to the other side. Therefore, your army can include army cards of mixed colors. Let's go over the colors right now. The first color would be purple, which is Einar. Then there's Utgar, who comes in red. There's Ular, who comes in green. We have brown, which is Valkyrie. Yellow, which is Aquila, or Aguila, or I don't know how you pronounce it, Aquila, whatever. Have gray, which is Vidar. Blue, which is Jandar. And coming in 2024, when Renegade Game Studios relaunches Heroscape, we have a new general, Volarak, who comes in lime green. And as you can see by this picture, it is still a prototype, but in bone white, which used to be orange, we have Revna. And finally, as of right now, just a concept that was teased, not guaranteed to come to the game, is Thorman, who we're not sure what color he would be. And sorry that I'm just taping my computer screen and these are low quality, but I was being quick, so oops. Using a pre-made army. Experienced players might know exactly which armies they want based on the game scenario, the point values, their favorite figures, or other factors. If you've already chosen, or brought along, your army, place your cards in front of you. Then players roll to see who places his army on the battlefield first. Re-roll ties. The highest roller will place his entire army first. Placement then passes to the left. You must place your entire army in the same starting zone. You cannot place any figures in an enemy-occupied starting zone. If there are more army figures than spaces in the starting zone, you can't use the extra figures. And starting zones are determined by the scenario that you're playing on, or by the map that you're using, or just by the players when the map gets built. If it's just willy-nilly, put together, you choose what the starting zones will be, how many hexes there'll be, and your deployment spots. Using a preset army. Some scenarios have the armies chosen for you. As in the basic game, you choose the preset army that you want to control. After choosing your army, place your army cards in front of you, then place your figures on the battlefield. For this example here, this Feral Troll and these Deepworm Drow, they come assigned to Player 2 in the scenario Drow Ambush. Player 1 gets these characters. Drafting an army. Drafting an army is a fair and fun way for players to choose their army cards for a well-balanced game. When you select an army card, take the figure or figures shown on the card and place them in the starting zone immediately before the next player selects an army card. You must place your entire army in the same starting zone. You cannot place any figures in an enemy-occupied starting zone. If there are more army figures than spaces in the starting zone, you can't use the extra figures. So, for example, we'll say Derek and Corey are about to play a 2-player game of Heroscape. Both players would first roll the 20-sided die. The higher roll drafts first by choosing one army card. This one will be chosen here, and then placed immediately in the starting zone, and then it would move to the next player, who will say chooses these two. And they put their figures in the starting zone on the map as well. Each player in turn then chooses one army card until both players' armies have been completely chosen and placed. Let's say Derek set up Heroscape, and in addition to Corey, Matt and Josh also showed up to play a game. How would that work? Well, like this. All players rolled a 20-sided die, re-rolling any ties. The highest roller drafts first by choosing one army card. Then, the player to the left chooses one army card, and so on. The last player to draft chooses 2 army cards. Drafting goes back around the table, it reverses direction. The last player, the player who drafted first in the first instance, chooses 2 army cards, then the draft reverses direction again. And then on step 4, if at any time a player cannot pick another army card because choosing it would exceed the total army point limit, that player must pass. If you pass, you've completed your army. Then it would just continue going back and forth around the table with the last player in each direction choosing 2 army cards and reversing the draft direction until all players have gathered their armies. There are campaign games available for Heroscape, and Battle for the Underdark had a campaign scenario. It is a different way to play and not one that is easy to get without some assistance and preset maps and storylines. But let's say you're playing the Dungeon Adventure 1 Ancient Sanctum campaign in the Master game on Room 2 Battlefield in the Battle for the Underdark Rulebook. This game calls for each player to gather a preset army, and then it would show you exactly where they are placed on the board, just like making a preset army selection when you're just playing a scenario. You'll notice that this feral troll is in a different spot than it says to put in the rulebook, because placing him like that would make an impossible placement. So it was errated later. So in the gathering and placing your army step, one last example here is you were given this preset army in the Room 2 scenario and told where to place them, which that would be incorrect. It would be this, this, and this. And your opponent was given the preset army from Room Scenario 2 and also told where to place them, which, according to the little map guide, was wrong. And now we come to order markers. Each player takes a set of order markers, 1, 2, 3, and X. On each round, you'll place these on your army cards to mark the order in which your figures move and attack. These are wound markers and combat dice. Place all the wound markers and the combat dice near the battlefield. The combat dice are used as attack dice, rolling for attacks, and skulls, and also defense dice, rolling for defense and shields. Whether you're playing a campaign, a scenario, or just a custom game, you may need some glyphs or treasure glyphs. These quote-unquote magical enchantments and equipment are placed on certain spaces in several of the game scenarios, or just in spots agreed upon by the players beforehand when starting a game. Most of them grant special powers to a figure that activates or picks them up. But beware, most treasure glyphs are protected by traps. We'll get more on glyphs later. And now the battle begins. The game is played in several rounds. A round consists of 3 turns for each player. Going over a round of play real quick, the round marker track. The round marker track is this little set of numbers that in this case is on the Battlefields and Game Scenarios section of a rulebook. Some game scenarios will feature a numbered line where players keep track of the rounds they've played. Before starting the first round, place the round marker on the number 1 spot, or any other marker, perhaps a wound marker. You can use whatever you like, and it goes to the number 1. At the end of each round, move the round marker ahead to the next number. Each round of Heroscape play consists of the following 4 steps. First, place your order markers. Second, roll for initiative. Third, players will then take their turns one at a time until each player has taken 3 turns, as denoted by their order markers. And then number 4, move the round marker ahead to the next number. All of these steps will be explained in detail. The first step is place your order markers. On a turn, you'll move and attack with figure or figures on an army card. Decide now which army card you'll use on which turn, then place an order marker on those cards. 1 for the first turn, 2 for the second turn, and 3 for the third turn. You may place 2 or more order markers on the same card if you want to use that card for 2 or even all 3 of your turns. Players place their markers at the same time. Place your markers with the numbers facing you so your opponent cannot see them. The X order marker is an extra order marker not used on any of your turns unless a special power denotes that it is used. It is only a decoy in normal circumstances to prevent your opponents from knowing which 3 order markers you intend to use. If your army includes 2 or more of the same common army card, you don't need to keep these figures separate. That is, keep track of which figure belongs to which card. For example, if you're using 2 cards worth of Deepworm Drow figures, each order marker is placed on either army card and activates any 3 of them, as there are 3 Deepworm Drow on an army card. Uncommon army cards, however, are unique to each figure, so you must keep track of which figure belongs to which army card. You can use stickers or a marker or anything, or just pay attention to which units are yours if you don't like marking up your pieces. Anyway, we'll get into commons and uncommons again one more time at the end of the video. But note that more competitive players can take turns placing all of their order markers. To do this, you would take the 20-sided die and roll it. The higher roller places all of their order markers first, then the player to the left places all of their order markers, and so on until all order markers have been placed. And here is a visual example of placing your order markers. If you're sitting across from someone, it may be just a general good strategic thing to not place them in numerical order, because then if your opponent is looking, they can see, oh, he took his number 1 and put it there. So you kind of just want to know in your head which moves you want to do with which units, and then kind of go from there. So on this round, you decide to mobilize Derek Ambershard. Yes, I know it's probably Duroc or something, but for some reason, like I said in my figures gallery, I prefer Derek. So I'm going to butcher his pronunciation as well as probably all of these other game names, because Dungeons and Dragon names are a nightmare in this. They are awful. Anyway, you choose to go first with Derek Ambershard, and then you would go ahead and go with Erevan Sunshadow in your second, and then on your third turn you decide to go again with Derek, and you use Anna as your decoy to fake out your opponent. Roll for initiative. At the beginning of a round, each player rolls the 20-sided die for initiative. In this case, a 13 versus an 11. The player with the highest roll will get to take each of their turns first in order marker sequence. Play then passes to the left. If there is a tie for highest roll, the tying players re-roll. On your turn. During a round, each player will take 3 turns. Usually, you'll do 3 actions on your turn in this order. Action 1, which is mandatory, is reveal your order marker. Action 2, optional, is move your figure or figures on your army card. Action 3 is attack with figure or figures on the army card, also optional. All 3 of these actions are explained in detail. So we'll start with action number 1, which is reveal your order marker. That is a mandatory action. Start your turn by revealing your order marker for that turn, then laying it number side up on the army card. Note that later in the game it is possible that the figure or figures on that army card will have been destroyed earlier in the round. In such case, you would lose your turn after revealing the order marker. Action 2, which is optional, is move the figures on your army card. Now you may move any or all figures on your chosen army card if you want to. Follow these rules when moving each figure. Check the move number. In this instance, Derek has a movement of 5, so you can move the figure in any direction up to the move number on its army card. For example, with a move number of 5, Derek can go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 spaces. Uneven terrain and water might limit movement, as you'll soon see. We'll get over the basics of movement in just a moment. The order of movement when it comes to squad figures is they move in any order, one at a time. Passing or landing on other figures. You can move through a space with a friendly figure on it, one of your own or your teammates, unless the figure is engaged, which we will get to engagement rules in just a little bit. You cannot move through a space with an opponent's figure on it, or end your move on a space with any other figure. So let's go over an example of basic movement. In this example of basic movement, Derek Ambershard has a move of 5. You advance him the full 5 spaces. Note that Derek may pass through Tandros Creel because he is a friendly figure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Moving up. When you move to a higher level, count the side of each higher level as one space, as well as the space you land on. In the following example, I'll show you how to do this. If your figure cannot move enough spaces to reach the top of a ledge, then it cannot move there. Note that glyphs, water tiles, shadow tiles, swamp water, do not add height to any spaces on which they're placed. They are considered to have the same height as the space below them. So in this example here, we have Tandros Creel with a movement of 5 wanting to move up this ledge. You count the side of each level as you move Tandros Creel to the top of the first ledge. Note that Tandros Creel cannot get up here because that would take more moves than he has, which is 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 would only get him to right here and not safely up there, so that would be 2, 3, 4. And now here's an example of a height limit for moving up. A figure cannot move up a number of spaces equal to or higher than its height number. Derek Ambershard wants to go up there, but he cannot move up there because the space is too high for him. He is a height of 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, so that's too high for him to climb, although he has a move number of 5. Moving down, when you move to a lower level, you don't need to count sides on the way down, but there could be a penalty for moving to a much lower level, which we'll get to when we discuss falling. In the following example, you're going to move Derek Ambershard down the ledge. You don't need to count the side of the levels when going down like you do when going up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now we'll discuss falling. Falling is when a figure moves down to a much lower level. It might get wounded. Falling does not stop a figure's movement, but it could wound or destroy it. Note, falling rules do not apply to a figure that falls onto a water space. A figure can fall onto water space from any level. However, all falling rules apply if a figure falls onto a shadow space. A fall is defined as follows. If a figure moves down onto a level that is equal to or higher than the figure's height, you must roll 1 combat die immediately to see if it was wounded. So we take a look here. Peloth has a height of 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That matches the height. 6, that would be a move down. And an immediate roll of the combat die. He would receive a wound. Note that when rolling for falling damage, you would not roll your defense dice, because that's a choice you made to walk off that cliff. You can't defend against your own stupidity. Or perhaps not stupidity, but strategic advantage. Just because you choose to walk off a cliff doesn't mean that it's a stupid choice. He's about to move off of this cliff. Let's see how high it is now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The figure's height. That already denotes a fall. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So that is 10 levels higher than the figure's height. That would constitute a major fall. If a drop is more than 10 levels higher than the figure's height, you must roll 2 additional dice in the fall for a total of 3 dice. So, moves down and breaks both his legs. When rolling for fall damage, for each skull you roll, add 1 wound marker to the figure's army card. We'll get to life in a little bit, which it's pretty self-explanatory. Either way, with our 2 demonstrations of falling, Peloth has 3 wounds. Can he survive the final example of falling? Let's find out. The crowd is gathered. The D20 is ready. Let's count the height out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Peloth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. 25 levels up, Peloth is going to make his move and move down. So that constitutes an extreme fall. If the move is 20 levels or more than the figure's height, you must roll the 20-sided die. If you roll a 19 or 20, your figure survives. If you roll a 1 to 18, the figure is destroyed. Bold, he charges. Peloth makes his move. And is dead. Sorry, Peloth. Moving on to a water space. When you move on to a water space from any other space, even from another water space, you must end your move there. Note that double space figures can move past one water space that's between two non-water spaces without stopping. They must only stop if their base goes into two water spaces. So in this example here, when you move Derek Ambershard onto a water space, he must stop. He has 5 movement, but no, it's just reduced to 1 for now. Now moving on to a shadow space. Unlike moving through water, when you move onto a shadow space from any other space, you may continue moving if you have moves left. 1, and then, because he's coming out from a higher elevation, which is moving from water or shadow spaces to land, for water spaces or shadow spaces that are lower than their adjacent land spaces, the moving up rule would apply. So, when moving from a water or shadow space to land, count the sides of each land space as you move. Continuing our example of his movement here, when moving Derek Ambershard from the shadow space, you would count up onto the adjacent land space. So that would be the 1 move down, the side here, because the shadow space is lower, would be 2, 3, 4, 5. Moving a double-spaced figure. Some figures, such as this feral troll, take up 2 spaces. When moving a double-spaced figure, decide which side to lead with. For example, this side or this side. Then move the figure so that the other side of what you've chosen follows the same spaces that the leading side just occupied. Always end a double-spaced figure's move on the same level spaces. In the following example, we'll show how that works. And again, note that glyphs, water tiles, and shadow tiles do not add height to any spaces on which they're placed. Because of that, a double-spaced figure can have one side on a land space and one side on a glyph, water, shadow tile, etc., placed on top of that adjacent space of the same level. They are considered to have the same height as below. So, we'll take this feral troll here and move him around. The feral troll has a movement of 5. So, we will choose this part to be the leading edge. Remember that the back part, that opposite of what you've chosen, has to follow the same spaces as what you move from. So, with a movement of 5, we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And again, a glyph adds no height, so the troll may stand there legally for play. Flipping a double-space figure. Anytime during a double-space figure's move, you can flip it. To flip a double-space figure, turn the figure around while keeping it on the same 2 spaces. The flip is free, does not count as part of your move. The double-space figure does not take any leaving engagement attacks when flipping, since the figure is staying on those same 2 spaces. Leaving engagement attacks will be explained later. Here's an example of flipping your figure. Wow. Thrilling. Here's an example of an overhang. Overhang exists when one or more tiles are above other tiles with space in between them. Figures that are small enough may move under the overhang. So we'll say Derek Ambershard goes down here for 1, 2, 3, and he would take a falling roll because he moved a little too low, and he's fine. But he is followed by the black dragon. So here's 1, and the dragon is unable to go into that overhang because the miniature cannot fit in that space. So it would be illegal for him to follow in there. That, I guess, is a legal placement because he's not messing with the tiles and he's sitting flat on both bases. But that's how an overhang works. Figures can also move up onto low overhangs. When you move a figure up a low overhang, count the nearby support tiles. For example, this Deep Worm Drow is going to count the nearby support tiles as it moves up onto the overhang. So this would be 1, 2, counting this side here, and then 3, 4. So again, you count the sides when moving onto a low overhang. 1, 2, 3, 4. Your figure actually doesn't stop here, so that's why the moving up rule doesn't count this as 2 spaces when going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 type thing, if that makes sense. I hope it does. And now, Othcuric and this Deep Worm Drow are going to show us the most basic rule of moving. Keep your base on the space. When you end a figure's move, make sure its base lies flat and is on that space only, or spaces in the case of double space figures. No part of its base may overlap another space or area between spaces. Legal, as in both spaces are occupied by him only. Illegal, he's standing between spaces. And now, tight quarters. Some battlefields have narrow passageways, rock outcrops, or overhangs that might limit the movement of some figures. A figure cannot move through or onto a space that it cannot fit completely onto. In this example, Othkirk is going to move or attempt to move through some tight quarters. He can't move onto this space, 1, 2, because he can't fit in there, and setting him offsets his base. He just doesn't fit, so that move is not legal. However, moving here, he could stop because although his wing is overhanging on that space, he is legally placed, so he can fit in that area. Now let's go over engagement rules. Most of the time, if a figure is next to another figure, they are adjacent. A figure becomes engaged when it moves adjacent to an opponent's figure. Adjacency exceptions are as follows. If one figure's base is on a level equal to or higher than the height of the other figure, they are not adjacent and therefore not engaged. In this example before you, you see that this Deepworm Drow would be engaged and adjacent to Derek Ambershard. However, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's his height. The Deepworm Drow is not adjacent to Derek Ambershard because the Deepworm Drow is on a ledge equal to Derek Ambershard's height of 4. We're going to use a height 6 ruin from the Rise of the Valkyrie Master set for this example. If an obstacle, such as a ruin, stone wall, or battlement is in between two figures, to be engaged, both figures' heights must be higher than the obstacle. If both figures' heights are lower than the obstacle, or only one figure's height is lower, they are not engaged. So Derek Ambershard is not engaged to this Deepworm Drow because this wall has a height of 6. However, with a height of 13 and a height of 12, Braxis and Subak Na are adjacent and engaged because a piddly little wall will not stop their war. Erevan Sunshadow is going to demonstrate leaving an engagement. He has a movement of 6. While engaged, your figure may move around an opponent's figure that it is engaged with. But as soon as your figure moves away onto a space that is not adjacent, your opponent's figure may take what is called a leaving engagement attack on your figure. To do this, the player who controls your opponent's figure rolls 1 die to attack. You do not roll any dice to defend your figure. If a skull is rolled, your figure takes 1 wound. So, if he was to move here, that's a leaving engagement with that Deepworm Drow, and he would take a wound. So, going back again to being able to move around the unit you're engaged with, just as a side note, always pay attention to the spaces around you, because we notice here that Erevan has a height of 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. This elf would be able to be adjacent. So if you're moving around 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just to get a better position on maybe this part, you just engaged yourself with this character as well. Which brings us to multiple engagements. Your figure may become engaged with more than one figure at the same time. As you leave each engagement, your opponent figure may roll 1 attack die. For each skull rolled, your figure takes 1 wound. So, we'll go over that real quick. Erevan decides to leave this engagement. With his movement of 5, he goes down 1. That's 3 immediate attacks on him. So, you gather your dice up. And that's 3 more wounds. He be struggling. And now we come to action 3 on your turn, which is an optional action that is attack with the figure or figures on your army card. It's time for you to attack with your hero. So who can attack exactly? Well, any figures on your chosen army card within range and within a clear line of sight, if necessary, can attack. If no figure on your army card meets these 2 conditions, then no attack is possible. You can also look for hidden figures at any time. Get up, feel free to walk around the battlefield and find out which figures are hiding where, behind raised terrain, areas with a rock outcrop, for example. As you do this, the other players may want to shield their order markers for you, so you cannot see them, and instead of finding hidden figures, cheat and find out which figures are moving next that are opposing you. Before attacking with a figure, check the range and line of sight as follows. Range. A targeted figure must be within the attacking figure's range. For example, with a range of 5, Tandros Creel can attack the Deepworm Drow because it is within 5 spaces of him. 3, 4. A figure with a range of 1 can attack a figure only from an adjacent space. A double space figure can attack from either space it occupies. When checking range, don't count extra spaces for any difference in levels. If the distance between your figure and the targeted figure includes an area with no spaces, for example, near the edge of the battlefield, you may still attack it, but you must count the spaces along the battlefield to check range. Engaged figures. If one of your figures is engaged with one or more other figures, we'll say this one's here, and there's an elf there. If you're engaged with more than one other figure, your figure may attack only the engaged figures. Note that a figure does not need line of sight to attack a figure that it is adjacent to. Attacking around other figures. You may attack figures even if other figures are between your figure and the targeted figure, but you must have clear line of sight to attack. Here's line of sight. To attack a targeted figure, your figure must be able to, quote-unquote, see from its location. Unlike range, the line of sight is just an imaginary straight line between your figure's target point, which is the green dot on their army card, and the targeted figure's hit zone, which is the red on the army card. Remember that the gray denotes areas that cannot be targeted. So, you would get behind your figure to look and see if its target point can see any part of the targeted figure's hit zone. If so, there's a clear line of sight. If players disagree about whether or not there is a clear line of sight, have an independent person make the call. If that is not possible, go ahead and roll a 20-sided die. Highest roll wins the argument. And when it comes to adjusting figures, players may touch or move only their figures and may do so only on their turns. For example, a player cannot move their figure out of line of sight on an opponent's turn. In this following example, we'll see if Tendros Creel has a line of sight on the Deepworm Drow that is standing behind the Feral Troll. So again, going from the target point on the figure to the hit zone of the enemy, you get behind your figure if possible and take a look. From their perspective, looking up, you can see the chest of the Drow, so that is a legal shot. So now that you checked the range beforehand, 1, 2, 3, 4, with his range of 5, and you checked the line of sight, you can shoot between the troll's legs. So that is a legal attack, and you follow up. So let's go over an attack right now. The figures on your chosen army card attack one at a time in any order. Each figure can attack only once, but each figure can attack the same figure or different figures. Note, some figures have special powers that allow them to attack more than once. Before attacking, consider height advantage, special powers, and glyphs, if any, as explained in a little bit. The snooze you lose rule is in effect with Heroscape. If you forget to do any of these things, tough luck. Maybe next time you'll remember. Unless your figure gets destroyed, then you'll remember that your mistake cost you. Height advantage. If the base of one figure is higher than the base of the other figure, that figure has height advantage, no matter the actual size or height of the figure. The higher figure has height advantage and will roll 1 extra die for either attack or defense. In this case here, if the figure's base is 10 levels higher more than the height of the lower figure, the higher figure instead rolls 2 extra dice for their attack or defense. When figuring height advantage, remember that glyphs, water tiles, and shadow tiles do not add height to the spaces they are on. Special powers and special attacks. Many figures have special powers or abilities that help them move, attack, defend, and more. Check your figure's army card to see what special powers abilities, if any, your figure can use. If your army card includes a special attack, a special power with the words special attack in the name, you may use this attack instead of a normal attack. We'll go over special powers in a little while. Glyphs. Some glyphs add to the attacker or defender and give them an advantage. Glyph powers will also be explained later. Shadow spaces, which are right here. When a small, medium, or large figure is defending and is on at least one shadow space, that figure would roll an additional defense die. To carry out an attack, follow these steps. Announce which figure is the attacker and which is the defender. Check the attack number on your attacker's army card, adding any extra dice for height advantage, special powers, or glyphs. Then roll that number of attack dice. After you roll, the defender rolls the number of defense dice on his defender's army card, adding any extra dice for height advantage, shadow spaces, special powers, glyphs, etc. Every skull an attacker rolls counts as one hit. For every skull hit the attacker rolls, the defender must roll at least one shield to block it. Important: for attack rolls, the attacker counts only skulls. For defense rolls, the defender counts only shields. If the defender rolls an equal number or more of shields than the attacker rolled skulls, the attack is then unsuccessful. The attacking and defending figures stay where they are, and the attack is over. If the attacker rolls more skulls, hits, than the defender rolls shields, the attack is successful. For each unblocked skull hit the attacker rolls, one wound marker is placed on the defender's army card, which we'll get into life. When a figure has many wound markers as they have life on its army card, it is destroyed. A figure with only one life is destroyed by only one wound. So, each member of this squad of the Deepworm Drow is considered to have one hit point each. The player who controls the destroyed figure places it on the army card. When all figures on an army card have been destroyed, the army card is out of play. Do not reveal any unrevealed order markers that are on that card for that round of play. On future rounds, you can't take any turns for that army card. At the beginning of the next round, any order markers that were on that army card as it was destroyed come back into play and can be placed in future rounds. And now we'll use the Obsidian Guards, who are a common squad, as an example here, for destroying a common figure when your army includes two or more of the same army card. If your army includes two or more of the same common army card, follow this rule when a common figure is destroyed. When any figure on your common army card is destroyed, you may place it on any matching army card if you do not have any of these figures destroyed. If a common army card already has a destroyed figure on it, you must fill up that card first before placing a destroyed figure on an empty card. After you've finished attacking, your turn is over, and then the player to your left takes a turn. So we'll say that this Obsidian Guard was already destroyed. You get another one destroyed. It can't go on this army card. You have to put it on this one and fill up this army card to completely destroy it before you can start destroying figures on an alternate card. And as I've said before in other videos, because I'm a visual learner, I like to go through things, so let's go through an example of an attack. We will say that Tandros Creel wants to target the Feral Troll. First, you check your range, which is 1, 2, 3, 4 from his hex. So, it's within range. You have a clear line of sight, so you decide to make the attack. First, you'd gather your attack dice, which is 2. Then, you'd check the Troll's defense, which is 1. However, you are currently standing 17 levels high, which is exactly 10 levels higher than the Troll's height of 7, so you would take 2 additional dice for having height advantage in this case. You roll 1, so the Troll would take the wound. Ending a round. After the last player takes their third turn, the third order marker, the round is over. Move the round marker ahead 1 space on the track if no one has won yet. Players then begin a new round by placing their order markers, then rolling for initiative. And custom scenarios, campaigns, just destroy them all matches. No matter what, it all comes to an end eventually, and you have to get to the phase ending the battle. The game scenario sets victory conditions for each game. However, if the game hasn't ended by the time you've played a certain number of rounds, which is either preset in the scenario or agreed upon by the players beforehand, if you even choose to use rounds, you may decide that the player or team with the most points wins. Here's how to score in Heroscape. In cases where scoring is necessary, each player scores points for each army card with figures still on the battlefield. Score the full points listed on the army card, even if there is only one surviving squad figure left in the game. That wraps up how to play Heroscape, but now let's dive just a little bit deeper into some stuff that was mentioned during the video. just because this guy's name is pronounced like differently by NPCs in Dungeons and Dragons games, real life people, and various Reddit posts, I'm going to try and do it and butcher it. Anyway, because it is not going to be buried in other parts of the video, let's go over common army cards right here. Common figures. Each army may have any number of a common army card with the same name. If your army has 2 or more of the same common army card, you do not have to keep those figures separate. That is, keep track of which figures belong to which card. For example, if you're using 2 army cards of the Sahuagin, we'll just say Sahuagin Raider, then each order marker placed on either army card activates any of them in your army. And let's go over uncommon figures. So those are also not buried elsewhere in the video. Uncommon figures. Each army may have any number of an uncommon army card with the same name. If your army has 2 or more of the same uncommon army card, you must keep those figures separate. That is, you have to keep track of which figure belongs to which card. For example, if you're using 2 feral trolls, you must clearly mark each feral troll figure and a matching feral troll army card so you can tell which feral troll is being activated by which order markers and which wound markers belong to which feral troll. Uncommon figures are considered to be unique figures in every other way. So if anything applies, like a special power or glyph or anything that applies to uniques, it will apply to uncommon figures. And that about wraps it up for how to play Heroscape. So we'll go over just some cleanup stuff and some final references, starting with glyphs. These are glyphs, these are treasure glyphs. Depending on the scenario, glyphs, which were available in other Heroscape master sets or small expansions, and or treasure glyphs, which became available in the Battle for the Underdark master set and was available in subsequent waves after that, they are placed on the battlefield space's power side up or either symbol side up. Glyphs are stationary unless otherwise stated for that in the scenario. When one of your figures moves onto a glyph that is symbol side up, stop there and turn the glyph power side up. The powers on the glyph then take effect immediately. When your figure lands on a power side up glyph, it must stop. Note that a double space figure must stop when its leading side moves onto a glyph. Some glyphs grant temporary powers, while others grant longer lasting ones. Let's go over treasure glyphs. Treasure glyphs, which are available in the Battle for the Underdark master set and waves D1, D2, and D3, are a special type of glyph. Treasure glyphs are normally mobile and can be carried by a unique hero unless otherwise stated in a scenario. Treat treasure glyphs as normal glyphs with the following exceptions. Some scenarios may break these rules. Number 1, only unique heroes can attempt to pick up or activate a treasure glyph. Remember, uncommon figures are considered unique for all special powers and glyphs. Other figures can land on spaces with treasure glyphs on them, but they cannot attempt to pick them up or activate them unless otherwise stated. Note that any figure may choose to stand on a treasure glyph and not activate it or pick it up, preventing others from gaining access to it. Treasure glyphs do not force figures to stop when moving onto them. However, a unique hero figure that ends its movement on a space with a treasure glyph may attempt to pick it up or deactivate it, depending on the treasure glyph's individual rule. When attempting to pick up or activate a symbol side up treasure glyph, you always roll for a trap before revealing it. You never roll for a trap on a power side up treasure glyph. Treasure glyphs that have been placed on a figure's army card affect only that figure that is carrying them unless otherwise stated. Treasure glyphs cannot be traded between figures. Treasure glyphs must first be dropped by one figure, either voluntarily while moving or by the figure being destroyed, and then they can be picked up by another figure at a later time. A unique hero can carry any number of treasure glyphs. So let's go over traps. When one of your unique heroes ends its movement on a treasure glyph that is symbol side up, you may attempt to pick the treasure glyph up or activate it, depending on the scenario. If you do, the figure might be caught by the scenario-specific trap. roll the 20-sided die. If you roll a 1 to 5, you set off the trap. Leave the treasure glyph symbol side up, and the scenario-specific trap would take effect. If you roll a 6 or higher, you did not set off the trap, and that figure landed on the treasure glyph now picks it up or activates that treasure glyph. Turn the treasure glyph power side up, remove it from the battlefield, and place it on the figure's corresponding army card unless otherwise stated in the scenario. That figure now controls that treasure glyph. And note, you do not need to roll for a trap when landing on a treasure glyph that is power side up. So most of the time, these will be available in scenarios, so if you use them for your just normal game, you and the other players at the table will have to agree what happens when a trap is sprung. Dropping treasure glyphs. At any point during a figure's movement, you may announce that that figure is dropping a treasure glyph. Announce which treasure glyph the figure is dropping and place it power side up onto a space the figure currently occupies. That figure may now continue its movement. Note that you cannot drop a treasure glyph onto a space that already has another glyph or treasure on it. Derek Ambershard is going to drop the heroic rune before his move. Rune dropped. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Losing treasure glyphs. If a figure that is carrying a treasure glyph is destroyed, the glyph is placed power side up onto a space the figure last occupied. So we'll say the Deepworm Drow took him out, and despite his most noble efforts, he has perished. Heroic rune dropped. If the space or spaces for double-spaced figures already has a glyph or treasure glyph on it, the treasure glyph the figure was carrying is removed from the game instead. If the figure that is carrying more than one treasure glyph is destroyed, the controlling player chooses which treasure glyph to place on the space that the figure occupied. Once each space the figure occupied has a treasure glyph on it, the remaining treasure glyphs, if any, are removed from the game. And there are two major types of treasure glyphs. The first type is a permanent treasure glyph. The power of each permanent treasure glyph is in effect as long as a figure carries it. Exception: there are some scenarios that have pretty much scenario-specific things, like the Brandar's chest treasure glyph is an artifact. It usually represents an object as directed by the game scenario. And then we have temporary treasure glyphs, like this potion of healing. The power of each temporary treasure glyph takes effect at a time of your choosing, so choose wisely. A figure must be carrying the treasure glyph to activate the temporary effect. Once the effect completes, the treasure is removed from the game. And now special powers. The special powers of a figure keep the game exciting, challenging, and unpredictable. Always be aware of the special powers your figures possess. They can make a big difference in your game. Attack dice and defense dice. Anytime an army card refers to an attack dice or defense dice, use the combat dice that come with the game. For example, Anna Carathon's card states that all figures you control within 3 clear sight spaces of Anna Carathon add 1 to their defense dice when defending against Utgar figures. These defending figures would roll 1 additional combat die when rolling for their defense. Shadow spaces. A shadow space is not a type of water space, so any special power that applies to a figure on a water space will not work on a shadow space. However, when small, medium, or large figures are standing on at least one shadow space, it rolls 1 additional defense die when defending. Special attacks, which again will always have special attack on the army card. Special attacks can never be modified by glyphs, height, advantage, or other special powers. A special attack is used instead of the normal attack. Special power references on army cards. Some special powers make reference to the species, personality, Valkyrie, unique, common, uncommon, hero, squad, and or class of other figures. For example, Anna Carathon's Turn Undead special attack references undead figures. Undead figures will be released in other expansions as well. Previous Heroscape expansions that had undead figures, such as the Zombies of Morindon and Cyprine Essenwine, and any other example of an undead you can think of, I guess, in Heroscape. Simultaneous special powers. If an opponent and you are using the same army cards with special powers that would happen at the same time, roll the 20-sided die to see who gets their ability to happen first. And 2 final points, one being team play, a team seating and play. If you're playing a team game, teammates should sit next to each other on one side of the table facing their opponents. Unless stated otherwise in the game scenario, teammates start in the same starting zone. Teammates play the game separately, but they can discuss strategy, offer suggestions, and so on. Teammates can also look at each other's order markers. Victory conditions for team vary with the game scenario or agreed upon by the players beforehand, but in most games you will work together toward a common goal. Team scoring. In cases where scoring is necessary, each team scores points for each army card with figures still on the battlefield. Score full points for points listed on that army card. And finally, using multiple game sets. This is where Heroscape really shines. Beyond just one master set, which is already amazing, combining 2 or more master sets, collecting expansion sets, terrain packs, figure packs, etc. gives you lots of new options. You can create supersized battlefields and play with any number of players. You can even boost the point value of your armies to match bigger battlefields. But along with that extra excitement comes a few special rules. Unique army cards. If you're combining 2 sets of army cards, make sure that no player has more than one of the same unique army card in their army. For example, your army cannot include 2 Anacharathon figures. However, you and an opponent can both have the same unique army cards. For example, you and your opponent can both have 1 Anacharathon in your armies. Uncommon army cards. This master set contained an army card that was noted as uncommon. Your army card can include 2 or more of the same uncommon army card. If so, the special rules that we went over previously in the video apply. Then, if you want, you can mark your figures and mark your pieces, so when you travel or whatever with your game, you'll know what stuff is yours. That is how to play Heroscape. This game was created in 2004 by Hasbro and was produced until 2010, and it passed hands between Milton Bradley and Wizards of the Coast, and it was attempted to be revived by Avalon Hill in 2022 with the Age of Annihilation Vanguard Edition on the HasLab page. That HasLab campaign failed. However, in 2023, it was announced that Renegade Game Studios is taking up the mantle, and they are going to produce Heroscape with no crowdfunding beforehand, and it's going to start in 2024, and they announced that the Age of Annihilation content that was shown in the HasLab campaign will be coming out for Heroscape. Whether or not that's going to come in the giant Vanguard Edition box is probably not likely. The Vanguard Edition box was specified as just for that HasLab, but they said everything you saw, including the stretch goals, were coming out. So, as you look forward to growing in the interest in Heroscape, or maybe just getting into it for the first time, rediscovering a collection, just starting a collection, just learning how to play for a tournament, or just watching, or whatever you do, as long as you're part of the Heroscape community, I believe you will have a fun time. Because as I've said before, this game lends itself to the limits of your imagination. If this game has something that can be designed for it, it should be. This game is amazing, and the more that's made for it, the better it is.